children slept upstairs. Stephen and Jennifer Chappell were killed at their house in Somerset. They leave behind 2 young sons, just 5 and 6 years old.
Specially trained officers providing support to the families of both Stephen and Jennifer, and our thoughts continue to be with them at this awful time.
2 men were arrested in connection with the murders. We have all the latest. Also tonight, a service in crisis. Grief for the woman who died waiting for an ambulance that took an hour to arrive.
No one should go through anything like that ever in their life, and I just, you know, sometimes I think, you know, could I have done more? But what can I do, you know? I'm not a doctor.
Avoiding the gift of COVID this Christmas. New advice to take a test before that festive shopping spree. A welcome fit for a prince after the documentary that riled the royals. And the young coder giving a voice to those who struggle to speak.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Detectives have revealed that 2 young brothers were asleep in their beds as their parents were murdered downstairs. Stephen and Jennifer Chappell were found with serious injuries at their home in a village in Somerset on Sunday night. They died a short time later. Police say although their boys, aged just 5 and 6, were not hurt, they are understandably distressed and are being looked after by relatives. 2 men were arrested on suspicion of murder. Tonight, 1 has been released. A friend of the victims told ITV News the Chappells were a lovely couple who did everything for their children. From the scene, our correspondent Dan Rivers reports.
Murdered in their home while their children were upstairs, Jennifer and Stephen Chappell were tonight named as the victims of an incident which has left a small community in Somerset stunned. This was the scene less than an hour after the attack in Norton Fitzwarren. Paramedics still in attendance. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to save the couple from multiple stab wounds. This afternoon, the police also confirmed the couple's 5 and 6-year-old children were asleep in the house when the attack happened.
This is a tragic incident which has shocked the community, and neighbouring officers are patrolling the area to provide reassurance. Utterly heartbreaking, you know, and to look at the situation that this community sees. It's isolated, the inquiries are ongoing, and obviously we'll come to a conclusion as to what happened in due course.
All day, forensic specialists have continued to scrutinise the house and the parking bays in front of it. There are suggestions locally that the couple had disputes with their neighbour over parking. A 34-year-old man remains in custody following the incident. The police investigation is continuing here in Norton Fitzwarren, but the thoughts of this community tonight are very much with those 2 children who were in the house when the attack happened, who are now being cared for by family nearby. People living on this normally quiet estate can't understand how such a violent incident could have happened.
You don't hear of that round here at all. You know, you might hear about the odd break-in here and there, but that's about it. It's a shock.
Tonight, in a statement, the head teacher at the school where Stephen worked said Steve was a fantastic colleague at West Somerset College, a brilliant teacher that cared deeply about the students in his care. Steve will be sadly missed by all staff and students, and our thoughts and prayers go out to his children and wider family at this time. The murders have been voluntarily referred to the police watchdog because of prior police contact with those involved. It's not clear why that was, or whether a feud over parking had somehow escalated to murder. This afternoon, the police were using a drone to take images of the parking bays and vehicles in front of the Chappell's house, where this evening a forensics tent is still in place. The police have been given extra time to question a 34-year-old man who is understood to be a neighbour of the murdered couple.
OK, Dan Rivers in Norton Fitzwarren, thank you. Now, a son whose mother died while waiting almost an hour for an ambulance has told ITV News how he desperately tried to save her. Beena Patel from Ashton-under-Lyne was struggling to breathe when her son Akshay dialed 999. He called again and again, but still no help came, and Bina had no pulse by the time paramedics finally reached her. Akshay is now demanding answers from North West Ambulance Service. It comes as ambulance waiting times in England are at their longest on record. And a warning that this report from our health editor Emily Morgan includes some of that distressing 999 call.
It is a shrine to a beloved mother who should still be here today. Bina's son firmly believes her death could have been avoided. For 1 hour on one night in October, Akshay tried desperately not only to keep her alive, but also to get her an ambulance.
No one should go through anything like that ever in their life, and I just, you know, sometimes I think, you know, could have done more. But what can I do? You know, I'm not a doctor. I tried. I called the people that I think, you know, that should have come and helped.
Akshay was woken in the night by his mum, who was struggling to breathe. He called an ambulance at 2:30. It didn't come, so he called again.
Okay, we're very busy and we aim to be with you as soon as possible, or as soon as we have an ambulance available. Currently, it's likely it could be over an hour and a half, but that's from your first call.
Right.
Okay?
Okay.
It's just incredibly busy this evening.
Half an hour later, and they were still waiting. His mother became very distressed.
Bina, relax. Just
Observation breathing.
No.
All right, so
I don't know. She's lost a lot of breath.
Tell me exactly what's happening.
An ambulance arrived 10 minutes later, but Bina was already dead.
The situation could have been different if they arrived on time, and I genuinely believe the system is broken. I mean, we waited a time that no one in the world should have to wait for an ambulance. And that's, you know, it's beyond a joke.
Akshay now wants answers, and the North West Ambulance Service is investigating why it took nearly an hour to get to them. But sadly, his story is not unique. The average response time for a Category 2 call, like the one Akshay was making, is currently 53 minutes. That's nearly triple the 18-minute target. In the North West, patients waited even longer, an hour and 7 minutes. The problem is that hospitals are full.
An ambulance crew would often do 7 or 8 calls in a 12-hour shift, but actually what they're doing is they're doing 1 or 2 calls. We're hearing of crews starting their shift, picking the first patient up, going to the emergency department, staying there for 10 hours, waiting to offload a patient. So that one crew who'd seen 7 or 8 patients are seeing 1 or 2.
And that's having a huge impact on patients?
Massive impact on patients, and those patients are coming to harm.
Labour's deputy leader and Akshay's MP is backing his plea for answers.
We know that the NHS has been under considerable strain at the moment, and we've seen staffing shortages, and then of course the pressure that's on the social care service at the moment increases the pressure on our National Health Service. So we need to give our NHS the resources they need. Nobody should wait that long for an emergency ambulance.
Bina did, and her son waited with her as she died.
Oh, it's horrifying. It's a really shocking case, isn't it? But how much is what's going on with ambulances really indicative of what's going on in hospitals as well, do you think?
Well, a lot. I mean, this is a really sad case. As you say, it is really shocking. But I think it is the clearest sign of what is going on in hospitals. I mean, doctors, consultants, nurses, unions have been telling us for months that hospitals are running at near capacity. And what happened to Akshay and his mother is potentially the cruelest and most brutal consequence of that. When hospitals are running at capacity or near capacity, which many of them are, there is no space to transfer patients from A&E into the rest of the hospital. If wards are full, patients stay in A&E. If A&E is full, patients stay in ambulances or in corridors, and paramedics have to stay with those patients and they can't go back out to get other patients. Now, in this case, there is no suggestion whatsoever that the call handler did anything wrong, but it could be potentially that the hospital was at capacity that night. Now, the government says it's putting millions of pounds into this to try to increase capacity in hospitals. But as Richard said to me in my report, many patients could come to harm because of this.
Yeah, it's really worrying. Emily, thank you very much. Now, people in Northern Ireland are being urged to work from home to stop the spread of COVID. Ministers in the devolved administration say coronavirus has once again taken a firm grip across society. But businesses say the message is unhelpful as they try to get back on their feet again. Well, Mark Mallet joins me from Stormont tonight. Mark, what's behind then this work from home advice?
Well, Mary, as you said, put quite simply, it's the surging COVID rates here. If you look at the top 20 areas in the UK with the highest week-on-week rise in COVID infection rates, Northern Ireland occupies 5 of those 20 places. So this really was an attempt by the Stormont executive today to try and get the public to buy into the messaging, the public health messaging once again. And that is to wash your hands, to wear masks where they are required, but also to work from home where you can. Now, why is that different? Well, in September time, the Stormont executive was asking people to prepare for a return to the office. Now they're saying, well, hold on. With that, work from home where you can, and employers should help employees work from home when they want to do so. But it's also an attempt by the Northern Ireland executive to put on a united front after a few days of quite public squabbling over the direction of travel here. The First and Deputy First Minister said that this was putting on a united front, an executive putting on a united front with the hope that the public would once again throw their support behind the COVID measures.
We are all very much united in asking the public to play its part along with us as politicians, that we can take every effort to try and minimise the transmission rate of the coronavirus.
This is a moment to reset things and to really refocus on where we are, and you know, there certainly are uncertain times, but now is the time for action.
Well, businesses aren't happy. The Health Minister said yesterday that some hospitality outlets may have to look at restrictions facing closure over the Christmas period, even if this current surge isn't suppressed. So really they will have to wait and see how this evolves over the next couple of days.
We will indeed. Mark Mallet in Stormont, thank you. Well, in England, the government has updated its testing advice. People are now being asked to take a lateral flow test at home before going to crowded areas like shopping centres or visiting vulnerable people. And our North of England reporter Hannah Miller is in Manchester tonight. So, Hannah, talk us through what's behind the change.
Well, Mary, it might still be November, but you can see people are already enjoying coming out to Christmas markets like this and looking forward to celebrating, hopefully, the Christmas that many of us missed last year. Really, that is what is behind today's change of guidance, keeping that Christmas possible. People are being urged to take a lateral flow test. They are free before they go to indoor crowded spaces or to visit a vulnerable friend or relative. Think about indoor shopping centres, for example, Christmas parties. The government says that 1 in 3 people who have COVID don't have symptoms and therefore don't realise that they could be spreading COVID around those kinds of places. This is guidance, it's not law, but there is also a psychological effect that upping the guidance will hopefully make people more alert to the risks. The leaders of Scotland and Wales, you've already mentioned Northern Ireland, have also strengthened their messaging around COVID today. The UK government doesn't want to have to take more stringent measures, and they hope that this will make a difference.
OK, Hannah Miller in Manchester, thank you. And talking of Scotland, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has urged the Scottish public to continue to follow COVID-19 measures to keep the transmission of COVID-19 down. Speaking in Holyrood, the First Minister warned about the current state of the pandemic.
The situation does remain precarious. Cases are on the rise to a greater or lesser extent in countries all around us, including here in the UK. And we are also entering a period when, understandably, people will be socialising and mixing more than normal. So even though our position now is relatively stable compared to some other countries, we must continue to take care.
Nicola Sturgeon there. Well, let's move on to mainland Europe now, where fears of a fourth wave have already prompted stern warnings and the return of stricter measures. The United States has urged Americans not to travel to Germany because of rising case numbers there. And our Europe editor, James Mates, is in Berlin. So, James, what is the latest situation where you are?
Well, things are tightening up very, very fast. This Christmas market is still open here in Berlin, though in a matter of days you're going to need to be doubly vaccinated before you're allowed to visit it. Another one in the city is shut, but right across southern Germany, Christmas is on hold. The markets are shut. New restrictions have been put in place. Ever since the Austrians did what they did yesterday, compulsory vaccines coming in and a return to a complete lockdown, there's been a big debate here in Germany whether they should do the same. Many regional leaders in the south, which has been particularly badly hit, wanting the German government to do the same thing. It doesn't look like they will. The health minister says that he's quite apart from the problem of enforcing that, he thinks it wouldn't have much difference on this current wave they're surfing under, that they're being hit by, because basically the lag time would be too long. And the politics also of compulsory vaccination, very, very difficult. And Angela Merkel is still only a caretaker chancellor here after the elections last year. But I mean, the situation in Germany is very serious. They're having to move patients around intensive care units because they're so full. I mean, they have roughly the same number of cases as we do in the UK, but because many fewer people are vaccinated, a lot more hospitalisations. So I do think we are likely to see new restrictions, particularly potentially lockdowns on the unvaccinated.
OK, James Mates in Berlin, thank you. Here, the children of a woman found dead in her home in South Wales described her as kind-hearted and generous. The body of 65-year-old June Fox-Roberts was discovered at her house in Pontypridd on Sunday. South Wales police have arrested a man on suspicion of murder. And police have launched an appeal to try to find a teenager who's been missing from a home in Plymouth for the past 3 days. Bobby Ann McLeod, who's 18, left her home in Liam on Saturday evening and had been due to catch a bus into the city centre to meet friends, but she never showed up. Now, a bus crash in Bulgaria has killed at least 45 tourists, including 12 children. The bus was returning to North Macedonia from Turkey when it went through a guardrail and it burst into flames. 7 survivors were taken to hospital after the crash. Chloe Keedy has the latest.
This burnt-out wreckage is what's left of a tourist bus that was full of families heading home from their holidays. They were travelling along this motorway through western Bulgaria when it appears their bus hit a crash barrier and burst into flames. Among the dozens that died were at least 12 children. But until all the passengers can be formally identified, their families face an agonising wait. These 2 men believe that their wives were on the bus, but they said they can't get any information, not even from the travel agency. One says his wife messaged him to say she'd let him know when they arrived, but he hasn't heard since. It's believed everyone on board was from North Macedonia. The bus was on its way back there from Istanbul. North Macedonian government ministers travelled to Bulgaria to visit the survivors in hospital. It's thought that 7 people escaped from the burning bus, and prosecutors hope they will hold vital information about what happened. Bulgaria's deputy chief prosecutor said, unfortunately, only 2 of them can talk, while the others are either in shock or at the intensive care unit, but their lives are not in danger. There will also be questions for the travel agency in North Macedonia, believed to have organised the trip. Across the country, flags have been lowered to half-mast and public events have been cancelled as the country enters 3 days of national mourning. While across the border in Bulgaria, an investigation is beginning into why most of the passengers on board this bus will never make it home. Chloe Keedy, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News.
If anyone here has any knowledge of Mr. Potter's movements this evening.
The remarkable, unmistakable voice of Alan Rickman is helping fight cancer even after his death. And the desperate battle for compensation from those wronged in the Post Office IT scandal.
I feel like I'm not me. Anybody who knew me before would know this isn't me.
But before all that, the Pope has called for the world to reject the ways of violence in a special tribute at Sir David Amos's funeral mass. The message was read out at a service in Westminster Cathedral, attended by hundreds of politicians and also Sir David's family. The MP was stabbed to death during constituency surgery in Essex last month. From Westminster, Garrett Vincent reports.
Watching over a faithful servant of British democracy, the doorkeepers from the House of Commons formed a guard of honour as the body of Sir David Amess was carried into Westminster Cathedral. He was a Member of Parliament for nearly 40 years, so Prime Ministers past and present were here to pay their respects to a devout Catholic for whose devotion to helping others the Pope sent a message of thanks.
His Holiness recalls with gratitude Sir David's years of devoted public service, guided by his strong Catholic faith and evidenced in his deep concern for the poor and the disadvantaged.
Even on an occasion of such sadness, the mourners couldn't help but remember a life in which there was always much laughter.
More than anybody I have known, David Amess had an intense, passionate interest in people. No waiter could ever take an order without first giving him an account of his life history. It was impossible to tear him away from a function because he always wanted to talk to somebody else. And as a consequence, he was always late for everything.
In memory of a politician whose first and last duty was always to the people he represented, singers from Sir David's constituency joined the choristers of Westminster.
I don't know about you guys, but I feel totally privileged to have been there today. Yeah, that's the word for it. A lovely guy, and you never forget people. You never believe that they've passed away. They're there somewhere, aren't they?
Sir David was buried in a private ceremony attended by his family. At the cathedral this morning, they saw how much his loss is felt by the public he served so well. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, it may have been a day to put aside political differences, but the Prime Minister's leadership remains very much under pressure. Boris Johnson lost the support of a number of Conservative MPs last night over his controversial social care cap for England. And that followed his so-called mess of a speech before business leaders. Well, our political reporter Shihab Khan is in Downing Street tonight. So, Shihab, it's being said that Boris Johnson's struggling to command confidence.
Yeah, as you say, politicians from all over the political spectrum put aside their differences to pay tribute to one of their own. But away from that, the pressure on the Prime Minister has been bubbling away. It's been a very difficult few weeks for him. First, there was criticism of the way he dealt with the Owen Paterson scandal after one of his MPs was found to have broken lobbying rules. There was criticism of his rail policy. Then yesterday, when he was addressing business leaders, he made some jokes about Peppa Pig. He lost his place in his speech, he had to apologise to the audience. He was criticised for that. And then yesterday, in the House of Commons, a number of his MPs voted against him when it came to his social care policy. Now, Number 10 have been defending the Prime Minister. They say that he's well, that he continues to work on his agenda. And with regards to that speech specifically, they say he makes hundreds of speeches. There's going to be the odd mistake here and there. Now, ultimately, that speech is a one-off, but it will be the discontent from his own MPs when it comes to policy, when it comes to rail, when it comes to social care that he'll be worried about, and he'll be keen to appease them and get things back on track as soon as possible.
OK, Shihab Khan in Downing Street, thank you. Look at other news now. The government's admitted that they failed to act on a warning that Kuwait was being invaded, leaving a British Airways flight to be taken hostage and the aeroplane destroyed. Documents released today show the ambassador to Kuwait warned of an imminent invasion in August 1990, but the message was not passed on to the airline. Many of the passengers and crew were held captive by the invading Iraqi forces for months. The online retailer AO has warned Christmas trading will be hit by ongoing product shortages and price rises. Today they announced a £10 million loss in the 6 months to September caused by supply issues. And a rapper had his tour bus pulled over by armed police on his way to a gig in Leeds yesterday evening. Drill artist Heady One was due to be performing at the city's O2 Academy. West Yorkshire Police said no arrests were made. Now, 6 months ago, dozens of former sub-postmasters and mistresses had their convictions overturned after Britain's biggest miscarriage of justice. But many are still waiting for compensation. The Post Office wrongly prosecuted hundreds of people for false accounting and theft after introducing a faulty new computer system. It ruined lives and careers, and some people even died before having their names cleared. As John Ray reports, those still waiting for the payments promised to them say the delays are adding to their pain.
I don't think I'll ever forgive the Post Office for what they've done. I certainly won't forget it, because it ruined our life.
Peter Holmes, former police officer, Post Office manager, pillar of the community, convict.
He was the sort of person that if he saw a penny on the floor, he would give it to somebody. You know, he wouldn't cheat or rob anybody.
And yet Peter was wrongly found guilty of stealing £46,000 from the Post Office he managed. He died before a court cleared his name, his reputation and his health broken.
Just lost all the will to live, I suppose. And yeah, that was hard.
It's been called the biggest miscarriage of justice in British legal history. But more than 6 months since Marion and others celebrated outside the Court of Appeal, she and many more are still waiting for compensation.
There's hundreds and hundreds of people that have just been totally financially and morally ruined.
The delay adds gross insult to grievous injustice, say campaigners. Marion's case is still bogged down in bureaucracy, and although the Post Office tells us it's trying to expedite payments, there are hundreds who fear they may never receive a penny. Between 2007 and 2014, 736 Post Office workers were prosecuted for false accounting, fraud and theft. It took 2 decades for campaigners to prove the losses were instead down to a flawed IT system. In December 2019, the Post Office settled 555 civil claims. So far, more than 70 criminal convictions have been overturned, but around 2,000 are still awaiting compensation.
People are elderly, people are sick, people are dying. People will not live long enough to receive not just compensation, but repayment for the lives that were taken from them by Post Office.
I've lost my home of 22 years, my business.
Sue Palmer was accused of stealing from her own Post Office branch. She won her case, but lost almost everything.
I feel like I'm not me. Anybody who knew me before would know this isn't me. I feel like my stomach's been ripped out, because not only am I fighting what happened then, I'm still fighting now.
And because she was never convicted, she doesn't qualify for compensation.
If you had pleaded guilty, you would now be eligible for compensation.
I'd be better off. I'd be better off if I'd have pleaded guilty. It just hurts. It hurts every time I mention it.
The Post Office told us it is extremely sorry for historic failures, but Marion, approaching 80, wonders how long she has to live with the nightmare.
You begin to wonder whether I'll ever see the end of it.
John Ray, ITV News.
It is just coming up 7 o'clock and we're on a little longer tonight. Still ahead before Emmerdale at 7:15. The explosive royal response to the latest William and Harry documentary. And the 9-year-old boy breaking down barriers after being inspired by his brother.
I knew if I didn't develop this app, then I don't know anyone who would think of it.
Coming up next tonight, ITV News can reveal the alarmingly low number of convictions for drug gangs which traffic children across the country. In 2015, the Modern Slavery Act was introduced with the hope that it could help prosecute those involved in so-called county lines, where children are groomed to sell drugs. But figures obtained by ITV News show that between January 2016 and March 2021, there have only been 22 prosecutions for modern slavery offences, where the victim was aged 17 or under. And in that same time period, there have only been 7 convictions. Well, that's despite the National Crime Agency estimating that there are around 1,000 different county drugs lines in operation and approximately 27,000 children in England identifying as gang members. Well, despite the efforts of police and other authorities, many are now questioning whether the law itself is fit for purpose. Lucy Watson was given exclusive access to the Met Police Modern Slavery Unit, where they're trying to tackle the issue.
There is no getting away from it. County lines affects every force in the country. Criminal gangs moving illegal drugs from big cities to rural locations and using children to do it.
We've also facilitated the movement of children in order to do this.
Children exposed to extreme levels of violence.
First time I went county lines, I got stabbed. Shot out, I've been stabbed, punched up so many times, like scars on my body. I just thought it was part of life, and I just accepted it. I was like, I'm gonna die whenever God takes me.
Jordan was 13 when he was coerced into selling drugs. He showed me the money he earned, the drug dens he was forced to live in, and the violent addicts he was exposed to. Lured by exploiters on the promise of new clothes.
I didn't have much. I didn't even have a coat. I didn't even have a phone. And I see people around me that happy, they're making money. People making 100 grand in like less than 6 months. Then once I knew what to do, then it just started going all over the country. I just saw it as like they're taking me in as a family. They're taking care of me. They're teaching me. They're telling me what's right, telling me what's wrong. They're telling me how to act, telling me how to speak.
Other children just like Jordan are also groomed for these crimes.
This 16-year-old girl, been arrested many times. It's a very hard childhood she's had. The exploiters knew her from the local area and have targeted her specifically.
Detective Superintendent Daniel Jackson works for the Metropolitan Police on covert operations, so needs to hide his appearance. His latest case involved around 20 children.
So this team here were the upstream drug suppliers who they were buying the drugs from.
He gave ITV News exclusive access to their modern slavery and child exploitation unit to explain how the gangs recruit.
The exploiters wait outside schools. They would probably know their parents, see them riding bikes, and they'll just stop them and approach them in the street. And if they don't do what they say, there's the threat of violence towards them, threat of violence towards their family. And once they're hooked, that's it. They're in the exploiter's back pocket. Police, CPS, the public, we all need to change the way we think about these children. Just because a child is found in possession of drugs, it does not mean they are responsible for that crime.
Recognising a child victim's need for support is one problem. So too is bringing charges against the perpetrators under the Modern Slavery Act. In the last 5 years, there have been only 22 prosecutions and 7 convictions for modern slavery offences, where the victim was aged 17 or under.
Those levels of both prosecutions and convictions are far too low, because they just give the message to the traffickers that the reward is high and the risk is low. People are trafficking children. They might be trafficking drugs as well, but what's more serious?
Why is it such a struggle to prosecute and ultimately to convict under the Modern Slavery Act?
Because it's much easier to prove trafficking of drugs than trafficking of human beings.
It means a greater understanding of the crime and greater efforts are needed from prosecutors, police and the public. Only then can the most vulnerable amongst us be better protected from the most extreme degradation.
Well, Lucy, something clearly isn't working, is it? Is the Act fit for purpose, do you think?
The Anti-Slavery Commissioner assures me, Mary, that there is nothing wrong with the legislation. She says what it is about is making this crime a priority, resourcing it better, developing expertise in it, both within police forces and, importantly, within the Crown Prosecution Service. It can't be about going for an easy win. Modern slavery penalties, generally speaking, are more severe than drugs punishments, for very good reason. We're talking about human beings. But prosecuting under the Modern Slavery Act takes more time. It takes more money and takes more effort. Recognising, for example, that a child involved in this kind of crime is a victim, giving that child the support they need to perhaps then go on to be a witness to secure a conviction in a case like this takes more investment. But these are children, Mary, being exploited, childhoods being destroyed. Surely they warrant this.
Yes, surely they do. Lucy, thank you very much indeed. Now, in an unprecedented move, Buckingham Palace, Clarence House and Kensington Palace have all got together to criticise a television documentary about Princes William and Harry. In a joint statement, they attacked the BBC and other media organisations for giving credibility to what they called overblown and unfounded claims. It followed a programme which aired last night, which looked at the relationship of the Duke of Cambridge and the Duke of Sussex with the press and media. Well, here's royal editor Chris Shipp on a new royal row.
We know that Prince William was not watching last night's documentary when it aired, because just as the programme was making claims about the relationship between monarchy and the media, William was hosting an award ceremony for the African conservation charity Tusk. The BBC programme, the first of two, examined what it called the unwritten contract between the palaces and the press.
As explained to me by a couple of editors, Harry had basically become the new Diana.
It included a private investigator admitting what shocking things he used to be asked to dig up on Prince Harry's former girlfriends.
Yeah, medical records, had she had an abortion, sexual diseases, ex-boyfriends.
The other allegation in the documentary centred on the various palaces and that the different households, William's, Harry's and Charles's, can and did brief against one another.
A lot of the most damaging and negative stories about Harry and Meghan that have ended up in the pages of the press have come from other royal households or from other royal aides or courtiers.
That claim was met with this joint response from all three households. Too often, it said, overblown and unfounded claims from unnamed sources are presented as facts, and it is disappointing when anyone, including the BBC, gives them credibility.
Very rare for the palace to issue a joint statement such as this.
As far as possible, they would always want to live by the adage, never complain, never explain. And the minute that you add a comment, well, immediately people are going to think there's something to cover up here, or there's no smoke without fire.
This was just one half of a two-part documentary. Next, an attempt to examine who said what to the press and how that might have contributed to Harry and Meghan's departure from the royal family. Chris Shipp, ITV News.
The voices of celebrities who lost their lives to pancreatic cancer are featuring in a new awareness campaign. The charity video features actors Alan Rickman, Patrick Swayze and John Hurt. Pancreatic cancer is the deadliest of the most common cancers, partly because it's so hard to diagnose. Martha Fairley spoke to Alan Rickman's widow.
If anyone here has any knowledge of Mr. Potter's movements this evening.
His voice was instantly recognisable. But actor Alan Rickman, whose roles included Severus Snape in the Harry Potter films, is one of many well-known performers who've died after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Now his voice is being used in a campaign to raise awareness of the deadly disease.
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
His widow Rima says Alan only had 6 months after he was diagnosed.
Very few people survive long enough to give survivors' tales. And a lot of people's awareness of cancer comes from people writing diaries or following their journey. We don't get much of that with pancreatic cancer because there isn't one. Chemo doesn't work on all cancers that well, and it wasn't until very late on in the process we realised it really was going to be terminal.
Patrick Swayze, Sir John Hurt and Aretha Franklin are some of the other famous voices lost in recent years to pancreatic cancer. But despite that, only 8% of us know what the most common symptoms are. 3 in 5 people are diagnosed with the disease in the latter stages, making it much harder to treat. And there are 9,000 deaths in the UK each year. Charlotte's mum Helen had pancreas-related seizures several years before her cancer was diagnosed. And with more research, Charlotte feels her mum's outcome could have been different.
There's funding, research and stuff that is so much needed. Screening, how do you screen it? What can they do? There's so much more that needs to be done because if it was more known when Mum had her first seizures, I'd probably still have my mum.
And developing a test is vital because symptoms are vague, including back pain, indigestion and weight loss.
We've got this campaign. This is about raising the funds to develop that simple test for GPs to diagnose pancreatic cancer early.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
But until then, pancreatic cancer will continue to be a silent killer, cutting lives short with little warning. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
Well, for more about the signs and symptoms of pancreatic cancer, go to our website. Now, the former Leeds Rhinos captain Kevin Sinfield has raised more than £1 million for motor neurone disease charities after running the equivalent of almost 4 marathons in 24 hours. The rugby league star completed his mammoth challenge at Headingley Stadium this morning, all in aid of his former teammate Rob Burrow, who was diagnosed with the disease in 2019.
Yeah, we wanted a battle, but and we certainly got one. It was tough, really tough. The support's been incredible, and I think without people around in the streets like we did, it made it really, really tough. The team, as you've seen, have been magnificent.
And finally tonight, the 9-year-old boy who's using his computer skills to give a voice to children who struggle to communicate. Sean Porter from Stockport has designed an app which allows users to press a picture of what they want to say, which then speaks out loud. And Sean was inspired by his brother Adam, who has autism. And as Sangeeta Lal explains, now it's hoped it can be rolled out to help many others who are non-verbal.
I want to go to the toilet.
Toilet. Press whichever one you want.
I want to go to bed.
They are some of the simplest requests that Adam often wasn't able to ask for. Diagnosed with autism at 2 years old, he's always struggled to speak until now.
Do you know what it's saying? Yes. Good boy.
Using an app developed by his big brother Sean, Adam can talk by just tapping a picture. All created because Sean was originally asked to make a game for a school project, but instead he decided to go one step further.
I knew if I didn't develop this app, then I don't know anyone who would think of it.
How does it feel that you might be able to help so many people?
It feels absolutely amazing. I feel wonderful. People they generally don't think about other people. They think if I make this amazing invention, I'm going to be epic and famous and I'm going to have loads of money. But they don't focus on anyone else and how it affects them.
It's estimated around 40% of children with autism are non-speaking. For Adam's father Liam, he hopes this app might help change that statistic.
Him asking for food, him telling you he was hurt, him wanting to go to the toilet, all of those things was guesswork. Basically, it's just opened up more choice for Adam. After we created it, he's now asking for more things and he's developing faster.
And so is his bond with his family, who are finally able to understand what Adam wants, and today that's just to spend more time together. Sangeeta Lal, ITV News, Southport.
Oh, and that's it for now. Julie's here with the news after I'm a Celebrity. From me and all the team. Bye-bye.